Let me start by saying this. It's not every day you find yourself handcuffed in your own driveway. And if you're wondering how someone like me, the chief of police, ended up in such a bizarre situation, trust me, I've asked myself the same question. It all started with something as simple as moving into what we thought was our dream home on Maple Crest Lane. Little did I know, this quiet neighborhood would turn into the setting for one of the strangest chapters of my life. When Sarah and I first visited Maple Crest, it seemed perfect. The streets were lined with trees, the houses looked like they belonged in a magazine, and everyone waved hello like old friends. We imagined lazy Sunday mornings, sipping coffee on the porch and evening strolls with the dog. What we didn't imagine was that beneath the surface of this picturesque suburb lay a group of people who took rules to a whole new level. Enter the Homeowners Association, or as I came to call them, the HOA. At first glance, they seemed harmless enough. They sent us a welcome packet when we moved in, filled with guidelines about lawn care, parking, and noise levels. Honestly, I barely glanced at it. Between running the police department and keeping up with family life, I didn't have time to worry about whether my mailbox leaned slightly to the left or if my son's car engine was too loud. To me, those things felt like small annoyances, not crimes worthy of punishment. But the HOA didn't see it that way. Oh no, they sought everything. Every detail mattered to them, from the color of our front door to the placement of our flower pots. If you dared to step out of line, even just a little, they made sure you knew about it. Their warnings came in the form of neatly typed letters slipped under our door. The first few were mild enough. Trim the bushes, move the trash cans out of sight, repaint the fence. Nothing earth-shattering. But as time went on, their demands grew more ridiculous. Then there was Evelyn Carmichael, the president of the HOA. She lived 3 doors down and ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in velvet gloves. On the outside, she was polite and charming, always smiling and offering baked goods during block parties. But behind closed doors, she was relentless. Her obsession with rules bordered on fanatical, and her influence over the other neighbors was undeniable. If Evelyn said something needed to change, people listened, even if it meant turning against their own friends. Things really started to spiral out of control when my teenage son, Jake, bought a used Mustang. He'd been saving for years to fix it up, and he was proud of his work. Unfortunately, the car had a custom exhaust system that roared like thunder when he revved the engine. It wasn't obnoxious, at least not to us. But apparently, it drove the HOA crazy. They sent letter after letter complaining about excessive noise. Even though Jake rarely drove it before 10 p.m., when we ignored them, they escalated their tactics, leaving passive-aggressive notes and making anonymous calls late at night. That's when the strange part began. 2 men showed up at our house one afternoon, claiming to be HOA enforcement officers. They wore uniforms that looked like cheap knockoffs of real police gear and carried clipboards full of citations. When I asked for identification, they hesitated, mumbling excuses about being contracted security. I sent them away, thinking that would be the end of it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. Something dangerous. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, crisp and unassuming, like any other piece of mail. But as soon as I picked it up, I could tell this wasn't just another friendly reminder from the HOA. The envelope was heavier than usual, its edges sharp and precise, bearing the official seal of the Maple Crest Homeowners Association in shiny gold letters. It looked more like an invitation to a royal gala than a notice about neighborhood rules. Still, I didn't think much of it at first. I tossed it onto the kitchen counter with the rest of the day's mail, figuring I'd glance at it later. When I finally opened it that evening, my blood pressure shot through the roof. Inside was a formal document written in language so stiff and legalistic it felt like reading a court summons. According to the HOA, we were in violation of Article VI, Section C, Subsection 4, No resident shall operate vehicles emitting excessive noise between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. The offense. My son Jake's Mustang, which he had lovingly restored over the past year. Sure, it had a custom exhaust system that growled when you hit the gas pedal, but calling it excessive was laughable. He hardly ever drove it before midnight, let alone during quiet hours. What really got under my skin was the tone of the letter. It wasn't just a polite request to tone down the engine noise. It read like a threat. They demanded compliance within 48 hours or warned us of further action. Further action. For a car engine. It felt absurd, like they were treating our family like criminals for something completely harmless. I crumpled the paper in frustration and tossed it into the trash, muttering under my breath about how ridiculous this whole situation was. But the HOA wasn't done with us yet. 2 days later, 2 men showed up at our door dressed in uniforms that looked suspiciously close to actual police gear: dark pants, tactical vests, and caps with embroidered badges. At first glance, you might mistake them for real officers if you weren't paying attention. One of them held a clipboard while the other carried what appeared to be some kind of citation book. They introduced themselves as HOA enforcement officers, though their body language screamed insecurity. Something about them seemed off, not quite professional, not quite legitimate. They explained they were there to issue a formal citation regarding the noise complaint. When I asked to see their identification, they hesitated, exchanging awkward glances before one mumbled something vague about being contracted personnel. Contracted by whom? And why did they feel the need to dress like law enforcement? I stared at them, trying to process the absurdity of the moment. These guys weren't cops. They were glorified rule enforcers playing dress-up. I told them firmly that they weren't welcome on my property without proper credentials and instructed them to leave immediately. They shuffled away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to push back. As I watched them climb into their van, I couldn't help but shake my head. What kind of neighborhood had we moved into where people went to such extremes over trivial matters? Who gave these so-called officers permission to act like authority figures? That night, I sat down with Sarah and Jake to discuss what had happened. Sarah was furious, pacing the living room as she ranted about how petty the HOA was being. "It's just a car," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "Why can't they focus on actual problems instead of harassing us over nonsense?" Jake, on the other hand, looked worried. "Do I have to get rid of the Mustang?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with disappointment. I put a reassuring hand on his shoulder and told him no way. That car meant everything to him. It represented hard work, independence, and pride. We weren't giving it up because Evelyn Carmichael and her crew decided it didn't fit their precious community standards. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation wasn't over. The HOA hadn't backed down after previous warnings, and I doubted they'd stop now. Their behavior was escalating, growing bolder with each passing day. Those fake officers might have retreated for the moment, but something told me they'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't come empty-handed. Fast forward to last Friday night, and that's when things took a turn I never saw coming. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the house was quiet except for the hum of the TV in the living room. I was sitting in my favorite recliner, scrolling through emails on my phone while sipping a cup of coffee. Sarah was upstairs reading, and Jake had gone out with friends, probably cruising around in his Mustang, though at least he wasn't doing it in our neighborhood. All seemed calm, almost peaceful. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of screeching tires shattered the silence. I jumped up from my chair and hurried to the window just in time to see 3 black SUVs pull into our driveway. Their headlights blinded me as they came to a stop, engines growling like predators ready to pounce. Before I could even process what was happening, 6 men dressed in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles. They wore helmets, carried batons, and moved with military precision, surrounding the house in seconds. My heart pounded as I watched them approach the front door. They banged on it so hard the wood vibrated beneath their fists. "Open up," "This is the law," one of them shouted, his voice echoing through the quiet street. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, phones already raised to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. Sarah rushed downstairs, panic written all over her face. "What's going on? Who are they?" she whispered, clutching our dog tightly to her chest. I didn't answer right away because, honestly, I didn't know myself. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene outside. Was this some kind of prank? A misunderstanding? Or worse, had someone actually called the police on us? I grabbed my robe, threw it on, and opened the door cautiously. There stood the leader of the group, a tall man with a stern expression who thrust a piece of paper toward me. "You're under arrest for repeated violations of HOA regulations," he barked, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Arrested? By whom? These weren't real officers. They couldn't be. But before I could protest, two of the men stepped forward and grabbed me by the arms. Before I knew it, cold metal cuffs clicked around my wrists. I stood there stunned, barefoot and wearing nothing but sweatpants and a t-shirt, as they led me out of my own house like a common criminal. Sarah followed behind, yelling at the top of her lungs. "Do you know who he is? He's the CHIDF of police." Her voice cracked with fury, but the men ignored her, shoving me into the backseat of one of the SUVs. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some filming the chaos with their phones, others shaking their heads in disbelief. It was surreal, like watching a movie where the plot made no sense. As we sped away from the house, I stared out the window, my mind reeling. How had it come to this? Over a car engine, a mailbox, some silly rules about shrubs and flower beds. None of it added up. And yet, here I was, handcuffed and being hauled off by people pretending to have authority they clearly didn't possess. When we finally arrived at a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of town, I realized this wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. This was personal. Someone, Evelyn Carmichael, most likely, had orchestrated this entire charade to teach me a lesson, to show me what happens when you defy the HOA. But what they hadn't counted on was that I wasn't just any ordinary homeowner. I was the chief of police, and trust me, they were about to learn exactly why messing with me was the biggest mistake they could have made. The warehouse was cold and dimly lit, its concrete walls giving off an eerie vibe that sent chills down my spine. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering occasionally and casting strange shadows across the room. In the center stood a long folding table surrounded by equally uncomfortable-looking chairs. It felt less like a meeting place and more like the set of some low-budget crime drama. Sitting at the head of the table was none other than Evelyn Carmichael herself, looking smugger than I'd ever seen her. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair perfectly styled, as if she were hosting a boardroom presentation, instead of orchestrating what could only be described as a kidnapping. Her lips curled into a tight smile when she saw me being escorted in by two of her fake officers. "Chief Grayson," she said smoothly, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Thank you for joining us." I glared at her, refusing to sit. My hands were still cuffed behind my back, and every muscle in my body tensed with anger. "This is insane," I snapped. "You think this is some game? Impersonating police officers is a felony. You're all going to jail for this." Evelyn waved her hand dismissively, as though my words were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Oh, please, Daniel, don't be so dramatic. We're simply enforcing the rules. Your repeated disregard for community standards has gone on long enough." "Community standards?" I shot back, incredulous. "You dragged me out of my house in handcuffs because of a car engine. Are you serious right now?" She leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening. "It's not just about the car, Chief. It's about respect, for the neighborhood, for your neighbors, for the rules we've all agreed to follow. When one person ignores those rules, it sets a dangerous precedent. If we let you get away with breaking them, what message does that send to everyone else?" Her tone was calm, almost reasonable, but there was something unsettling beneath it, a steely determination that made my stomach churn. This wasn't about noise complaints or overgrown shrubs anymore. This was about control. Evelyn wanted to prove a point. No one was above the HOA, not even the chief of police. I took a step closer to the table, glaring at her. Let me make something very clear, Evelyn. Whatever little power trip you're on ends here. These men aren't real officers. They don't have badges. They don't have jurisdiction. And they sure as heck don't have the authority to arrest anyone. You've crossed a line tonight, and trust me, you'll regret it. For a brief moment, her confident facade cracked. She glanced nervously at the men standing guard around the room, then quickly composed herself. You can threaten all you want, Daniel, but the truth remains. You violated the rules. And until you address those violations, we can't allow you to return to the neighborhood. Allow me, I repeated, my voice rising. You think you're in charge here. This isn't your kingdom, Evelyn. You're not a judge, a cop, or anything close to someone with actual authority. You're just a homeowner with a clipboard and a grudge. At that, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For the first time, I saw genuine frustration flash across her face. We tried to handle this civilly, she said sharply. We gave you warnings, citations, chances to comply. But you refused to listen. Now you're forcing us to take drastic measures. Drastic measures. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman had lost her mind. She truly believed she was justified in abducting me, handcuffing me, and holding me in a warehouse, all because I didn't conform to her vision of perfection. The absurdity of it hit me like a punch to the gut, and despite everything, I couldn't help but laugh. You really think this is going to work? I asked, shaking my head. Do you honestly believe you'll get away with this? Before she could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside interrupted the standoff. Someone shouted, "They're here," and chaos erupted. Evelyn's goons scrambled toward the exits, their confidence crumbling in an instant. Through the open door, I caught sight of flashing blue and red lights, and knew exactly who had arrived to save the day. My team had found me, and Evelyn's reign of terror was about to come crashing down. The moment those blue and red lights flashed through the warehouse windows, the atmosphere shifted completely. Evelyn's men froze like deer caught in headlights, their earlier bravado evaporating into thin air. One of them dropped his baton with a loud clatter, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Another bolted for the exit, only to be tackled by Detective Harris, who moved with the precision of someone who'd been chasing criminals for years. It was chaos, but organized chaos. Captain Rodriguez led the charge, storming into the room with a team of officers armed and ready. His voice boomed as he shouted, "Stand down. Everyone against the wall. Hands where we can see them." The authority in his tone left no room for argument. Even Evelyn, who just moments ago had seemed untouchable, looked pale and shaken. Her fake officers scrambled to obey, raising their hands and pressing themselves against the walls like scared kids caught sneaking out past curfew. Some of them muttered excuses under their breath, trying to explain themselves, but no one was listening. My own cuffs were still digging into my wrists, but seeing these imposters brought down a peg or two made me feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Rodriguez spotted me immediately and hurried over, his face a mix of relief and disbelief. "Chief, are you okay?" he asked. The days following the warehouse incident felt like a whirlwind of media attention, neighborhood gossip, and legal proceedings. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. Chief of police arrested by fake officers made headlines everywhere. Reporters camped outside our house, eager to interview me, Sarah, even Jake. At first, I tried to avoid them, but eventually I realized it was better to address the situation head-on. So I held a brief press conference in front of our home, answering questions calmly while making it clear that no one, not even an overzealous HOA president, was above the law. Evelyn Carmichael's trial became a spectacle. Every detail of her bizarre scheme was laid bare. The fake uniforms, the staged arrest, the threats against me. The courtroom was packed with spectators, from nosy neighbors to curious journalists. Evelyn sat stiffly beside her lawyer, her usual confidence replaced by a pale, defeated expression. When the judge handed down guilty verdicts for impersonating officers, false imprisonment, and conspiracy, she barely reacted. As she was led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of relief and pity. She had gone too far, but part of me wondered if she truly understood why. Back on Maple Crest Lane, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a public ordeal. Most of our neighbors apologized profusely, claiming they'd had no idea Evelyn would take things to such extremes. Some brought over baked goods or left notes on our doorstep, saying how sorry they were for not standing up to her sooner. Others avoided us altogether, clearly embarrassed by their association with the HOA drama. It was hard to know who genuinely regretted what happened and who was just trying to save face. Sarah decided to channel her frustration into something positive. She planted a new flower bed along the front yard, filling it with vibrant blooms that added color and charm to the neighborhood. "Let's show them we can follow the rules without losing our minds," she joked one afternoon as we worked side by side in the dirt. It wasn't about pleasing the HOA anymore. It was about reclaiming our space and proving that we weren't going anywhere. Jake, meanwhile, agreed to tone down his Mustang, at least during early mornings and late nights. He installed a quieter muffler system and promised to park the car in the garage when he wasn't driving it. "I don't want anyone using my car as an excuse to mess with us again," he said, shrugging. While I hated seeing him compromise on something he loved, I appreciated his maturity. We'd all been through enough, and sometimes peace meant making small sacrifices. Despite the resolution, I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lingered beneath the surface. Evelyn's obsession with control hadn't vanished overnight. Her empty house stood silent at the end of the street, its windows dark and curtains drawn. Every time I passed by, I half expected to see her peeking out, watching us. And then there were the whispers, rumors that she still had allies among the remaining HOA members, people who shared her vision of order and resented my defiance. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch sipping tea, she voiced what we'd both been thinking. "Do you think this is really over?" she asked quietly, glancing toward Evelyn's house. "Or is she planning something else?" I sighed, setting my cup down. "Honestly, I don't know. But I do know one thing. We're not backing down. If she tries anything, we'll handle it. Together." Her words stayed with me long after we went inside. Evelyn might have been defeated for now, but her actions had exposed a deeper issue. The fine line between maintaining order and abusing power. In a place like Maple Crest, where appearances mattered more than kindness, it was easy to let fear dictate behavior. But I refused to live that way. Our family had fought back, and won. Whatever came next, we'd face it head on. Because at the end of the day, home wasn't just a house or a set of rules. It was the people you chose to stand with, and the values you refused to compromise. Months passed, and life on Maple Crest Lane settled into a fragile kind of normalcy. The HOA meetings, once dominated by Evelyn's iron grip, became quieter affairs led by a new president, Mr. Peterson, a mild-mannered retiree who seemed more interested in organizing block parties than enforcing rules. Neighbors waved hello again, though some still avoided eye contact when I walked past. It was as if the neighborhood had collectively decided to sweep the whole ordeal under the rug, pretending it never happened. But for me, the memory lingered like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. Then one day, a plain manila envelope appeared in our mailbox. There was no return address, no stamp. Someone had hand-delivered it. Curious, I opened it inside the house, finding only a single photograph. In it, Evelyn stood beside a man in a dark suit, both smiling confidently, as if posing for a professional portrait. Scrawled across the bottom in shaky handwriting were the words, "Asterisk, you haven't seen the last of us." Asterisk. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Who was the man in the suit? And what did Evelyn mean by us? Was she planning revenge? Or had she found allies willing to take her crusade to the next level? I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to piece together its meaning. Sarah walked in just as I was tucking it into my desk drawer. "What is that?" she asked, frowning. "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just something from work." She didn't look convinced, but let it drop, sensing I didn't want to talk about it. Still, the image haunted me. Every time I drove past Evelyn's empty house or noticed a neighbor watching me too closely, I wondered if they were part of whatever plan she was cooking up. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at the photo again. The man in the suit looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. His presence suggested resources, money, connections, maybe even influence. If Evelyn had teamed up with someone like that, we could be in deeper trouble than before. This wasn't just about noise complaints or flower bids anymore. Something bigger was at play. I decided not to tell Sarah or Jake about the photo. They'd been through enough, and I didn't want to alarm them unnecessarily. Instead, I started paying closer attention to the neighborhood. I noted which neighbors seemed overly friendly all of a sudden, which ones whispered behind their hands when I passed by, and whose cars stayed parked outside Evelyn's house late at night. It felt strange, almost paranoid, but I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not after everything we'd been through. One evening, while taking out the trash, I spotted a flyer taped to a lamppost near the entrance of the cul-de-sac. At first glance, it looked innocent enough, an announcement for a community meeting scheduled for the following week. But something about the wording caught my eye. Asterisk, join us as we discuss ways to restore harmony and unity to Maple Crest. Asterisk, harmony and unity. The same buzzwords Evelyn used to justify her actions months ago. I tore the flyer down and brought it home, studying it carefully. There was no signature, no mention of the HOA, but I knew better. This wasn't about hosting a friendly chat over cookies and coffee. Someone was testing the waters, gauging how much support they could rally against us. The next morning, I called Captain Rodriguez. "I need you to keep an ear out," I said, keeping my tone casual. "There might be some rumblings in Maple Crest. Nothing urgent yet, but just stay alert." He hesitated. "Chief, are you sure this isn't personal?" "It's not," I replied firmly. "Not entirely, anyway. People like Evelyn don't give up easily. If she's got backers now, we need to know." Rodriguez agreed to look into it discreetly, and I felt a small measure of relief knowing someone else was watching our backs. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle wasn't over. Evelyn had lost the war, but she hadn't surrendered, not completely. As I stood on the porch later that night, gazing at the quiet street bathed in moonlight, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever came next, I wouldn't back down. We'd fought too hard to reclaim our peace, and I refused to let anyone take it away again. Evelyn might have thought she could scare me into submission, but she underestimated one crucial thing. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the chief of police. And I didn't lose fights. Not then, not ever.